For the last several years, there has been a push in Republican-led states to dehumanize people with gender dysphoria. They are dehumanizing them by not giving them the dignity that they deserve, but they're also not allowing them to get needed and potentially life-saving medical care. Now, federal judges are starting to push back on this, and they are ruling that these bans are not constitutional and they cannot stand as they are written. So let's talk about it. Hey everybody, it's Dr. David. So today we're going to be talking about several judges' rulings that are at the federal level that are pushing back against state-led rules, regulations, and laws that has been affecting people who are transgender and who have gender dysphoria and not allowing them to do gender-affirming care. Now, in particular, these laws are about about youth and the gender affirming treatments that they need, but also that Medicaid state funds, as well as federal funds, because Medicaid gets passed down to the state, which have been restricted to be used for these patients, that they are now going to be allowed to go through, at least in some states. Okay. Now, I recently had reported on a case here in Florida where there were 3 transgender youth who, despite the law that was passed recently here in 2023, that the judge ruled that it was medically necessary, potentially life-saving, for them to start their gender-affirming hormones and also to be allowed to use puberty blockers immediately, saying that the permanent harm can happen to these youth if the interventions do not start right away. And also, it is felt that that's probably setting precedents for other families in the states, and already there are other court battles that are going on, so we probably haven't heard the end of this in Florida, okay? Now, I did go through in much detail on May 26th a video about what gender-affirming care is all about. Okay, and I've put the link to that down in the show description below if you didn't get a chance to see that and you want to have a much deeper understanding about how it's not just these medications that they treat, but also just the respect that people give them, that using names and pronouns that a person associates with. That's all part of gender affirming care, because it's how we care, how we treat people as well. Okay, now, interestingly, the wording that has been used in these new rulings by the judge are also using the same wording that the original Florida hearing and the new rules went into place. So it's kind of like that's where the precedence is, using the actual words. So now let's start in Florida. And in Florida, the judge, whose name is Judge Robert Hinkle, he's a district judge. He is the same judge who put forth the allowance of those 3 transgender youth to get their treatment. But he then struck down recently a Florida prohibition on Medicaid coverage for gender-affirming care. And he said, there is no rational basis for a state to categorically ban the treatments or exclude them from the state's Medicaid coverage. Okay, now, so this is the second time that he's pushed back directly against the Florida legislation that was signed by our governor. Okay, now, for those who don't know, because most people think of Medicaid as something for poor children, and while that is so, it's actually does provide coverage for low-income adults as well as the children, but also for pregnant women, as well as elderly people and people who are disabled. So all of that falls under the category of what Medicaid does. Now, Medicaid. Now, according to the federal, the Disabilities Act, the American Disabilities Act, the ADA. According to this, gender dysphoria is considered a disability. And as I mentioned, Medicaid is for people with disabilities. So that is the reason why this is also something that should be covered, because just like any other disability, autism, schizophrenia, other mental health issues, physical health issues, a disability is a disability, and people have a right to get medical care. Okay, now why is this particularly important for people on Medicaid? Well, if you're low income, you may not have the funds to pay for it out of pocket. You may not have the funds to take off time to go travel to another state, or in some cases, like we are seeing, to relocate. Obviously, you need to have finances, something to allow that to happen. So this, by pulling the rug out of these Medicaid patients, Florida gave them really no other option that they could pursue. So that's why this is, again, important, and why and how this will be so helpful. Okay. Now, the second thing we're going to talk about is how in Arkansas, there was a permanent the ban that was for children under the age of 18 to get any of this gender dysphoria treatments. There's a federal judge there that made it permanent. Okay. Now, there was a temporary injunction that had been in place. Arkansas is actually the first state in the country to have put forth several years ago this ban on gender affirming care for minors. And so there was a hold being put on it, but now it was a permanent injunction that has been placed forth by a judge, and this is a judge named Judge Moody. Okay, now Judge J. Moody, to get his name right, to thank him for taking this up. So now, since that original law in Arkansas was placed, there have been 19 other states who have enacted similar types of laws. And all of them are now being challenged in court, or almost all of these states. So again, with precedents being set, that really is something that judges have to take in consideration going forward. That's what precedence is, right? Now, what the law itself did was it prohibited doctors from providing gender-affirming hormone care, puberty blockers, or surgeries under the age of 18. We've talked previously about how surgeries are rarely, if ever, done in people under the age of 18. So that's not really an issue. Okay. Now, but it also did ban state funds or insurance coverage, like the Medicaid, for any of these care for people under the age of 18 to be paid for it. But also, it would have allowed private insurances to refuse coverage for gender affirming care for people of any age. Look, more restrictive than what Florida had put in that way. But it also prohibited doctors from even referring patients elsewhere to get care. So even mentioning, hey, you can go to California or whatever, that it made it illegal for doctors to even mention such a thing. Okay, so in issuing this permanent injunction, against the law, and so it's been echoed in some of the other blocks in states such as Alabama, even Indiana. So it's not just the South of America, Midwest states. Some are putting that into place as well. But what the judge said was that these laws were unconstitutional because they violated due process as well as equal protection acts of the transgender youth and their families, but that it also violated the First Amendment rights of doctors to be able to speak openly about medical care that a patient could get. Okay, so it was actually two things why the judge ruled on this, to both protect doctors for speaking as well as the patients and their families. Now, the judge went on to then state, rather than protecting children or safeguarding medical ethics, the evidence showed that the prohibited medical care, that the care itself does improve the mental health and well-being of patients, and that by prohibiting it, the state undermines the interests it claims to be advancing. Okay, that was some of the wording that was also part of the Florida, in the Florida ruling of the original one, which again said that it is not in the state's best interest to do this to its citizens. Okay, so now from a summary, what's my take on all of this? So while people with gender dysphoria continue to be attacked and marginalized, there are some rays of hope now that we're starting to see that maybe there is some tide turning. Okay, hopefully one day we are going to see that people will be allowed to live their lives however they want. That's what freedom is. Medical freedom, liberty is about. Everybody being able to do what they think is right for them, and that the government or anybody else should really have no business involved with that. So hopefully that type of overreach is going to be pushed back and people can just go on living their lives. Have a nice day.